And welcome to Black Kids in Outer Space for a late night show. Today we are in Canada. I'm speaking to Darnel Harris. Darnell Harris is the executive director of Our Greenway in Toronto, Canada. Harris is an International Green Talents Award winner, planner, and community activist. He has spent the last 4 years in an effort to break down barriers to mobility for all ages and abilities in Toronto's Northwest. With a passion for space, animation, mobility, and sustainability, he has forwarded research and facilitated dialogue towards advancing equitable and dignified mobility. So thank you so much for coming to the show, Darnell.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Let's see here. Right here. I have a question for you. What is your first memory of transportation?
Hmm. Well, I grew up in the Caribbean. So a lot of my memories of transportation actually came around being driven around to various places. And in Dominica, which is a small island in the Caribbean, I would call it the Alps of the Caribbean in a lot of ways because it's a lot of mountains, a lot of steep pathways. What I remember actually is being very nervous on a lot of these roads because you've big cars and very small roads that were never really built for them. And just, the space challenges of being able to go through there. And a lot of that has impacted um, sort of my thinking in terms of, ways to be able to move through spaces in a more convenient manner.
That's very, it's a very interesting story because I actually I didn't even expect to hear that. Usually I'm able to Google someone and find all the information. I'm like, did not see that coming. So you immigrated to Canada and you kind of like had this different kind of experience. So when you got to Canada, or which city did you move to?
Well, actually, I was born here. I grew up in the Caribbean, then I moved back.
Okay,
So if the flag on the wall, I'm not sure if you can see it, that's the flag of Dominica.
okay,
And I moved back to the city of Toronto, which
okay.
is which is where I live now, and went to school here. Did my university, high school university here, and since then I've been working, coming out of my university degree on the Greenway project.
Yeah, that's a question I have. I want to ask about your project. Like, why did you decide to go into urban planning? Like, what kind of made you, other than that first experience, which to me is like weird. It's like you always were thinking in a term of space and being an urban planner. I've asked people that question. They're like, I wasn't thinking about it at all until I got to college. But you were always kind of thinking about it. So why did you decide to go into the environmental side of urban planning, the transportation side?
The transportation side kind of happened by accident. I've always loved and enjoyed planning events, planning, you know, sort of organizations, the meta side, if you will, of things. So, for example, over my years, I was chair of an environmental nonprofit. I also organized the first farmers market, a just farmers market at York University, where I went. And then what turned me on to the transportation side is one day I took a bus ride. My mom wanted me to meet her at Jane and Finch, which is intersection not very far, maybe about a kilometer or so from the university. And to get there during rush hour, you have to take a bus. You have to either walk, take a bus. Well, yeah, you either have to walk, take a bus, or bike. She didn't want me to bike, so I said, "Okay, mom, sure," and I would take the bus. And I took the bus, and it took about 43 minutes to go 1 kilometer.
Wow.
Taking the bike would have been 13 minutes without breaking a sweat. And a lot of that is effectively what interested me in this, in mobility. The business case is right there. So, I paid something $5 Canadian. Uh, that's probably a little less than American, needless to say. But whereas if I had simply taken a bike, it would have been a lot faster, a lot cheaper, a lot more effective.
Well, I have a question. Why didn't your mother want you to ride your bicycle? Was she afraid?
She was very afraid. There are a lot. It's a mixed industrial area. So you're either riding on the sidewalk, realistically speaking, that's where most people ride, or you're riding on the road. And if you're riding on the road, you're riding next to oil tankers or 40-ton 18-wheelers.
Wow, wow, that's yeah. So she was afraid, but you wanted to ride your bike, but you had that public transit. I have a question for you.
Mhm.
In the United States, a lot of communities of color, indigenous communities, Black communities, Latinx communities, we're hyper segregated, which means not only are we segregated socially, we're also segregated in regards to physical distance.
Mhm.
Like if you are in a Black neighborhood in like Brooklyn, it'll take you twice as long to get to the center of the city. Same case in Los Angeles. Not only will it take longer, the buses take longer. It's harder to bike because we tend to be around industrial, arterial roads. Is that a similar case? I mean, is it as racially is your race so much a determinant as that in Canada as it is in the United States, or is it something that people kind of experience in regards to maybe class or something like that? Maybe there's a different reason behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's certainly a correlation there
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
between class and race. I would say
Mm-hmm.
that it's more in Toronto, more related to class.
Mm-hmm.
Toronto is a city that was only very recently built out. Where I'm living right now, um, some viewers might have heard of Casa Loma. There's a castle that's been built of sorts around 15 minutes from here. Well, 100 years ago, um, there were bears and wolves living where I am right now, which
Wow.
which 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 is Midtown in
Mm-hmm.
Toronto. There's still the occasional black bear or bear that tends to wander through certain parts of the northern part of the city. But I say that just to give you an idea of how new Toronto is in a
Mm-hmm.
big way. Um, the the phenomenon that's sort of been flowing through Toronto over the last, let's just say, 60, 70 years is that you had a situation where downtown Toronto, like most industrial cities, was the place where the factories were. If you had money, you wanted to move out to the suburbs,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of families did that. A lot of mostly white families, of course,
Mm-hmm.
that could afford to do that. And what's happened now is now that tastes and interests are changing, um, the core has been redeveloped increasingly,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the uh, services that were built to service the lower class population are now at the uh, doorstep of people of much higher means than they were ever able to serve. So today, what you see, and David Helchansky from the City of Toronto Cities Institute has done a lot of work on this. It's called Three Cities Within Toronto, and it's sort of chronicling this change by where the subway network, which is in Toronto a bit like upside down T, for
Mm-hmm.
example, um, is so the downtown and along the subway lines is increasingly economically wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
and meanwhile, the rest of the city, the suburban parts of the city, are increasingly, shall we say, both more racially diverse, but also more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So this is, it's very interesting. I mean, I want to ask you another question, even though I'm gonna have to ask you about it later. I saw that you ran for office, for the NDP. Do you want to talk about that? Or we can, we can talk about that later.
Sure. Um, I did it because this was just coming out of my master's at the
Mm-hmm,
time. I had spent the last couple of years walking around the community, speaking to people in multiple different areas, uh,
mm-hmm,
establishing the farmers market. There's a local community farm, one of the only farms, I think the only one of two within the city of Toronto. So speaking to them, getting a chance to their concerns, and just coming out of my master's, it was a unique opportunity to be able to walk around the entire community which is larger than the Black Creek neighborhood. There's about 4 or 5 neighborhoods. Um, Apart from that,
Mm-hmm.
loosely speaking, uh, that make up the entirety of the Humber River Black Creek where I ran. It was an interesting experience, mainly because you're knocking on doors, putting up signs, addressing people, asking people, why are they interested in this or that. But the value of it for me was, and at least, and it helped to feed the Greenway project as well, is just get a sense of why this was important.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you
And
know,
well, and now we're since you brought it up, while you're here is because of the our Greenway plan that you have kind of been working on for a long time, like 4 or 5 years. You've been working on it. Wasn't your like master thesis on that idea?
yeah.
And let's why don't you give our viewers a little bit of information about the our Greenway plan? You remind me so much of someone that I know who did the Move LA plan, Damian Goodman. I have to get you guys to meet each other. You guys are like twins. But go ahead,
Would
tell
love
me
to.
about your our Greenway plan.
So, I mean, the Our Greenway mobility plan uses the arterial roads to put uh, a 3 meter wide pathway alongside the sidewalk
Mm-hmm.
that allows for a range of mobility devices. So electric wheelchairs, bikes, cargo bikes, uh, rollerblade scooters, and it comes out of just what the community expressed its need for. In that
Mm-hmm.
you go up there, I was just walking around a couple of weeks ago, and there was people walking on the sidewalk. There's this massive green space which is just grass that usually ends up with trash on it, and no water can go through that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a senior who's in her mobility wheelchair having to go through the grass
Mm-hmm.
around somebody walking to get around. And you also see everyone biking on the sidewalk, for example. So there's
Mm-hmm.
great need for this sort of pathway, as well as it also opens up lots of business opportunities to be able to get people around. About 2 years ago, there was a big scare when I was still at York University because someone had built effectively a man cave in the ravine,
Mm-hmm.
um, right next to where the Pan Am Games was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be happening. And it turned out that this gentleman, the local community gentleman who had some carpentry skills, thought, hey, this is my backyard, this is a ravine, why don't I build something down there?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it just comes out of the industriousness of the community. There was lots of skills within the community. They want to be able to, you know, run food service companies, run service companies, run other sorts of entrepreneurship, and meet the needs of the community. But having a cargo bike or things like that allow them to do that, and other sorts of mobility devices. And that's where the concept of the Greenway really came about. This multimodal pathway that fits alongside the road
Mm-hmm.
and has a safe barrier that people feel comfortable using.
And I love the fact that you bring up people who have different abilities. Like you bring up the wheelchair, you bring up the cargo bike, you bring up, meaning people who have children, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's a really great way to be thinking about mobility, not just about a guy who's on his bike who's not a primary caregiver. You have to think about the entire community. And I think that's one of the things that's really great about the Greenway. Now, this is did this come out of the Finch West LRT, like your subway? Does it have anything to do with that?
Yeah, it came out of a consideration of the Finch West LRT, which is the
Mm-hmm.
LRT that's going in. It's going to be 11 kilometers long, and sort of the question of mobility. And then right now you have several dozen stops.
Mm-hmm.
I think 56, if I recall. Um, the reality with an LRT is, as compared to a bus, is you want to cut down the number of stops
Mm-hmm.
as a result. So I think they're eliminating somewhere in the vicinity of around 40 stops, 30 to 40 stops, somewhere in there. which you have to do if you're going to use light rail,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't be building a stop anywhere, and if you're stopping every couple of seconds, then it's not rail anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is okay so long as you have given proper consideration to the challenge of how are you getting from this rail to your house, for example. And in a suburban area, that's very far. When these stops are half a kilometer or more apart, for example, uh,
Mm-hmm.
moving around. But there's also, the reality of just how people get around the community. Most people need to move through the community, not around it. So, sorry, most people need, let me reverse that. Most people need to move around the community, not through
Okay.
it.
Okay. I know
Um,
what you're saying. I know what you're
yeah.
saying.
So, the challenge with that, of course, is, for example, the light rail goes along a line.
Mm-hmm.
Most people live above the line and have to go below the line and maybe travel along the line for a minute or two, if they were to take it. And then there's a bigger question of, well, how they bring their goods back and forth. So either people don't go, people use a car, or people struggle to be able to move through. So there's that need for that link between your house and where you live and where you want to work and the service you want to deliver and how you make the use of these arterial roads.
No, I think that that's something that's really, interesting, taking into account for a large project. Is this kind of a working class community?
Yes, very
Okay,
much
we're
so.
okay, working class community. What they need in regards to going around within the community is very kind of groundbreaking. We're not even really thinking on that level. I mean, we want to be thinking on that level, but we're not really thinking on that level out here in the United States. And that's kind of where we kind of need to be. So Metrolinx is kind of like your agency that does transportation planning in Ontario.
Yeah, they're a relatively new government agency who was
Mm-hmm.
tasked by the government, the previous government. That we just elected a new one, so we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
To deliver rail and other transit projects across the province.
Okay. Okay.
Um, so, the challenge that we've had in transport planning, frankly, is they're not thinking on that level here either. The idea of local mobility. Usually, when they pull together the consultant studies which underlie the design for these things, we don't ever see the benefit of this sort of low speed mobility devices and the sort of people they're carrying. So, for example, on our waterfront, you think of a waterfront, you think of a relatively well used, a space that you wish to be relatively well used. A lot of money was invested in a waterfront trail. Uh, the waterfront trail is about 4 meters wide or so, and that sort of design and what they built it for. The At the time they thought that 50 people an hour would use it.
Mm-hmm.
City of a million, city of effectively 1,500,000, 2 million people, and 50 people an hour are going to use a waterfront trail. Well, right now they're getting 500,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
and that just speaks to what's not being calculated and the effects of that. Right now, it's very difficult. They're going to have to live with the trail the width that it is,
Mm-hmm.
but there are opportunities to avoid that and of make use of a different paradigm.
Well, I have a question just because I've had friends who are in Toronto and they're talking about being put out in the certain parts of Toronto, talking about being put out of their houses and their apartments and things. Could this possibly lead to gentrification? Like, do you have an economic plan that's part of the Our Greenway? Just because it's kind of like it sounds really cool. So why would people who have more money, why would they not want to get on? Like once it got implemented, how would we make sure that the people it was for can stay there?
That's been a major part of the question around this plan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, before I directly answer that, it's worth speaking to the example of Sinclair and to the example of Eglinton, which are Sinclair is Midtown, Eglinton is another street up. and sort of what's happened when they've come to put in similar sort of rail projects there. The rail projects are planned and were designed both in Sinclair and Eglinton to fit a certain clientele, which is to say, there's a sidewalk, there are car lanes, and then there's your light rail. Um, so if you can't get on the transit for whatever reason, and you can't have a vehicle for whatever reason, you're effectively planned out of that space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's caused a lot of gentrification
Mm-hmm.
within the area. Um, something we have here in Toronto is the Yellow Belt. It is the colloquial term that's developed to speak of the fact that most of Toronto is actually single family homes,
Mm-hmm.
small houses. So what's happened? We've had intense price pressures where these lines have gone in because with the LRT and with the sidewalk and with difficulty of being able to get, for example, if you're not living close to these lines, apartments and property next to them have gone up in
Mm-hmm.
a very large way. The difference with the Greenway is accessibility and the benefits of that. So, for example, whereas it would take you 10 minutes to walk 500 meters. It's sorry, 10 minutes to walk about 800 meters. Um, More than 10 minutes if you are either young or old. With uh, Mobility Greenway that is put both along the arterial roads in the area, you can travel 2, 3 kilometers no matter if you're young or old, and no matter what you're carrying, up to 500 pounds, um, in 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, what it does is it makes it possible to make use of that infrastructure from 5, 6, 4 or 5 times away from the line, and it reduces the immediate price pressure in the area. So, whereas there might be some difficulty affording land or living directly adjacent to the line, it's not really a hindrance. If you're living further away, that opens up all sorts of untapped opportunities for housing, uh, for new businesses, for example. A lot of people, and I don't know what it's quite like in the U.S. around this, but the concern from a lot of people when they speak about intensification and housing is they don't want more cars in their street.
Mm-hmm.
And the planning formula, usually in Toronto, that's definitely true. Uh, you're not allowed to build, say a 4-story building if you don't have plenty of car spaces
Mm-hmm.
or are right next to a bus stop. You cannot do it. However, if you have things like cargo bikes and you have other ways of people getting through, you can be able to run businesses from further away. You
Mm-hmm.
have more people, but you don't have those noise and those cars that people don't like.
No, no, yeah, no. This is, yeah. I mean, that's the problem we have too in the U.S. too. If you build a building, then you have to have a lot of parking, et cetera, et cetera. So it just becomes this kind of self-fulfilling type of thing. So it's like we need these kind of solutions, and we need people who are thinking on your level in regards to this. I noticed that you use the United States as kind of an inspiration, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail as inspiration for this project. Well, not inspiration, but kind of like example, like this is what we could be. Um, so in the U.S. and in let's see here, let me ask you a question. In Canada or in Toronto, what would people need to do to support this project?
They would need to do a couple of things. I mean, this is going to be moving forward to City Council in a couple
Mm-hmm.
of days. Um, have a look at the website, sign the petition. If you can donate a little, that would be even better because we're trying to put together a nonprofit to continue to support and grow, work on the research, work on the design, and have the community involved. Because we really see this as a long term project.
Mm-hmm.
The the work that's been done in Indianapolis, as well as Atlanta, but I'll get to that in a second, has been very much an inspiration. And what we've noticed, certainly with Indianapolis, is they have a nonprofit that runs and works with the communities to run activities and plans along the trail. Especially in a disadvantaged community, disadvantaged part of the city, you need that. You need an organization that's managing and working with people to run the advocates, uh, to build particular elements along the line. You know, this project is a big project, certainly, uh, and it's a 21-kilometer project that has all these big effects. But it continues to be challenging for us to be able to get it on the news, get it in the papers. But if you sneeze downtown,
Mm-hmm.
don't print that.
No, I know
you know?
it's very getting media is one of the challenging things when you're trying to get different projects off the ground, or just even to get people to think differently. It's kind of if you're not thinking like the status quo, they're like, well, you are a problem. You're not thinking the way you're supposed to be thinking, and you're trying to put a Greenway in a working class neighborhood, and we're trying to ignore them. We're trying to make things go through there as quickly as possible. So I understand the challenges because we have the same challenges here. So what can, just to kind of wrap it up, what can we in the U.S. do to support what you're doing?
Definitely, any sort of media help would be great, but ask your friends to sign the petition. That's the
Okay.
key thing we're moving ahead right now. Our Greenway, www.ourgreenway.ca,
Mm-hmm.
as well as have a look on the petition. There is a donate section for GoFundMe to be able to allow us to do that. Anything along those lines would be fantastic. I did want to give a quick shout out to Atlanta Beltline and Ryan Gravel
Mm-hmm.
because his work, I mean, Indianapolis was great in terms of a design. There's no other
Mm-hmm.
example like that I've seen anywhere else. But Ryan Gravel and the work they've done with the Beltline, the work he continues to do with the Beltline, is key and was key for me because he started his own project as a master's thesis, which he sent to city council, and it was successfully moved forward. But also the ongoing struggle of being able to, get these equity needs met, to be able to have the transit working with the community and being able to have it designed in a way that speaks to the needs of the community. It needs to be an evolving conversation, and that's what we're certainly hoping to be able to do with our Greenway. But definitely, what people in the U.S. can do, anything with the donation and anything with the petition will be of great help.
Mm-hmm. And also, too, we'll make sure that we put the information for the Greenway on our website, and we'll forward it to our networks and tell people to like sign up to. And also, too, I'm planning a trip to Toronto, so I'm come visit you. We're gonna
Excellent.
like we're gonna do Black Kids in
Looking
Outer
forward to
Space
it.
live. All right. So thank you so much, Darnell, for speaking with us today. And good luck on your our Greenway, and we will keep in touch and keep up with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Alrighty. Okay. All right. Bye, everyone.